seconds in order to get this done. Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Bass, as much time as she may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. I want to thank the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. McDermott, for his leadership, and I also want to acknowledge Congressman Rangel for his historical commitment to AGOA. But in addition, I want to thank, as I stand here next to two men who I consider giants in the House of Representatives, I want to thank them for their patience and their guidance with me. And as a new member here, it's been pretty amazing to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, Mr. Royce, Mr. Camp, Mr. McDermott, Mr. Rangel, as they all worked with me to make sure that we were able to be here this moment and pass AGOA. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of African Growth and Opportunity legislation, H.R. 5986. Passage of today's legislation comes as a result of strong and widespread bipartisan and bicameral support. It's been a pleasure to work alongside Mr. Royce in this bipartisan effort, and I also want to thank my friend from the Senate, Senator Coons, who has been a stalwart advocate. I want to acknowledge the African Diplomatic Corps. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of African jobs will be saved as a result of your efforts. Mr. Speaker, Africa is on the rise. Today, 6 of the world's fastest growing economies are in Africa. Opportunities abound, and we see increased political stability. Today's House vote on the extension of AGOA's fabric provision is by all measures a success for the U.S. and Africa alike. But we must not stop here. Let us take a moment to acknowledge this accomplishment, but also prepare ourselves for AGOA's reauthorization in 2015. Africa, a continent of opportunity, for too long has been overshadowed and ignored. While humanitarian, governance, and health challenges remain, we are the observers of remarkable growth and stability across the continent that exemplify positive strides that Africans themselves have made. Africa and its many nations stand on the critical precipice of extraordinary change. Increasingly, Africa's resource mineral wealth attracts investments by countries like China, Brazil, and India. We must, in the United States, increase our investment. We cannot allow our nation to be left behind. Thank you very much. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields.
Thank you. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I yield to the distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Dreyer, who's been active in trade issues his entire career in Congress, as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman is recognized. Gentleman is recognized.
Speaker, many of us have enjoyed saying over the past several years that if we don't shape the global economy, we will be shaped by it. And we also have, as we all know, so much attention focused on divisions that exist in this institution. We know that the media likes to cover pictures, mistakes, and conflict. And obviously conflict here is something that the media likes to focus attention on. Well, here we are, Democrats and Republicans coming together under the great leadership of my friend Dave Camp, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. We have the ranking member of the Trade Subcommittee. Mr. Brady was here earlier, the chairman of the Trade Subcommittee, working to focus on this notion of our shaping the global economy. As I look over and see my friend from New York, Mr. Rangel, I'm reminded of December 1999. He and I were with President Clinton in Seattle, Washington, at the ministerial meeting of the World Trade Organization. You know, that meeting itself turned out to be an abject failure. The meeting itself was an abject failure. In fact, I'll never forget the week after that ministerial meeting in 1999, the cover of The Economist magazine said, "Who lost in Seattle?" And the photograph was a starving baby in Bangladesh. But the good thing that did emerge from that meeting in Seattle that we attended back in 1999 was the fact that we were vigorously pursuing the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, and we had laid the groundwork, again working in a bipartisan way, to say that pursuing trade, not aid, was the best thing for everyone. Now, Mr. Camp was testifying before the Ways and Means, before the Rules Committee the other day, and we're talking about this issue of a zero-sum game when it comes to taxes. And we also have to recognize that when it comes to the issue of trade, it is not a zero-sum game. It is a win-win for us. And that's why I believe that if you look at all the issues covered in this measure, whether it's the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, whether it's focusing on our great friends to the south, Central American countries and the Dominican Republic, whether it's looking at the area where I'm going to be next week. Next week I'm headed to Burma, and I'm so enthused about the changes that are taking place. We need to encourage that, and I believe that the actions that we're taking here can play a role in continuing to encourage the positive reforms that we are seeing take place in Burma. We're not there yet. That's why we need to take this action, but we are moving in the right direction. And my fellow Californian, Mr. Royce, mentioned South Sudan, the newest country in the world. Last month, I was there when they marked their first anniversary of existence. And this is a country that is seeking to get its sea legs, and I was pleased to be there with my colleague, Mr. Price, who co-chairs our House Democracy Partnership. And we're looking at the idea of possibly putting together a partnership between this new parliament with a very impressive speaker in South Sudan and the United States House of Representatives. And the idea of incorporating South Sudan as part of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act is, again, an indication that we very much want to strengthen ties with new and re-emerging democracies around the world, not just politically, but commercially as well. And so, Mr. Speaker, I strongly support this effort. I congratulate my friends on both sides of the aisle who are making it happen, and I especially express appreciation to my very, very good friend, Mr. Camp, who has championed this and so many other important issues. And he and I will be together again this afternoon when we get to, I hope, put together a strong bipartisan effort to implement the notion of bringing about real, meaningful tax reform. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
May I inquire how much time remains?
The gentleman from Washington has 10 and a half, and Mr. Camp has 6.5.
Gentleman has 10.5 minutes. Gentleman from Michigan has 6.5.
Does the gentleman from Michigan have any more speakers?
I have no further speakers.
Okay, I'll close and then we'll finish. Mr. Speaker, I want to rise and say that many people played a part in all of this. Nothing in Congress ever gets done by one person. Nothing ever gets done by one side or the other. The good things that happen here always happen on a bipartisan basis. And I'm sorry Ed Royce left, because Ed Royce and I worked together. One day he called me and he said, "Jim, I'm going out to Africa to look at some of the places that the AGOA Act is working. Will you go with me?" I said, "Why?" Well, he said, "I need a Democrat on the trip." That kind of relationship is rare around here, unfortunately, and I think that people need to recognize that it is still going on, that this place runs on trust. Very early on in this session, I said to Dave Camp, "When are you going to bring up the AGOA Act?" And he said, "It's going to come up." And I've asked him many times since, and he said it's going to come up. And I told all my African friends it's going to come up, because Dave Camp said it's going to come up. And I am really pleased to acknowledge that he kept his word, because what this place runs on is trust. If you don't trust somebody in here, then you don't do business with them. If you trust them, even if it takes them a long time and you have to poke them a bunch of times, you know that ultimately he's going to do what he said he was going to do. And I want to acknowledge Chairman Camp for that, because I think it is reflective of what can make it possible for us to do tax reform in this House. It is something that took a long time, the last time they did it, but it was built on the trust between Reagan and Rostenkowski and Tip O'Neill, and it took a bit of time, but it'll happen if we learn to act on the behalf of the American people. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Well, I want to thank the ranking member of the Trade Subcommittee for his comments, his kind comments. This really was a team effort, and for his leadership as well over the years. A lot of people on both sides of the aisle came together to make this a reality. And I'll just briefly say that this is bipartisan legislation. It does deepen our trade and investment ties with Africa and with the CAFTA-DR countries. That also supports well-paying jobs here in the United States, as well as Mr. Dreyer stated, in other countries. This is not a zero-sum game. This will help both of our nations, as well as Africa. Also, this legislation reauthorizes the import ban on Burmese products, and I urge its passage and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 5986? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended and the bill is passed. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.